What's up everybody? Welcome back to the Jig Tying Basics video series. If you've watched the previous episodes up to this point, you will have gotten your materials, your tools, learned how to whip finish, and paint your jig heads. And now all that's left is tying your first jig. So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. When you're tying your first jig, it can be easier to use a larger hook, so I would start with a 1/8 ounce or 1/16 ounce. Before we start tying, let's learn about the anatomy of the hook, so that when you watch videos of people tying, when they say something about the hook, you'll know what they're talking about. So this is the head of the hook, this is the eye, this is the hook shank, this straight part, the bent part is the bend of the hook, and this is the point. So my first tip is to take the jig head out of the vise and place the tip in the jaws of the vise. I suggest doing this because when you're starting off tying, a lot of the times you'll rub your thread on the point of the hook and it will just cut it off. So to avoid that, we'll just hide the point of the hook in the jaws. You just want to make sure it's in there really tight so it's not going to move around. And the easiest way to thread the bobbin is to place the thread in the bobbin like so. You want to pull out enough so that it can go through. Lick the end of the thread so that it stays together. Place it into the bottom of the bobbin there, and then you can just suck it out the top. And there you go. Now to start tying, we're going to get about 4 or 5 inches of thread so that we have enough to work with. Then just place that thread on the bottom of the hook shank like this, and bring your bobbin over top, and just start wrapping. You want to do a few wraps to trap that tag end, and then we can just cut that tag end off like this. And that will hold it down as we wrap, so you can just continue wrapping down to the point of the hook that's trapped in the jaws. And when you're doing this, you don't want to pull too hard. The bobbin will just create the tension that it needs basically as you're wrapping. Alright, now we're going to grab our tail material. For the tail material on this jig, we're going to be using a chartreuse marabou feather. So we're going to pull that feather out, and to straighten the ends of that, I like to grab the end of the feather and run my fingers up from there on the other hand, and this will naturally line up the tips as you can see here. To measure it out, generally you want the tail to be the length of the hook shank if you have a really long hook shank, but if it's a shorter shank you want to do the length of the entire hook itself. So that's what we're going to do for this one. You can line the feather up against the hook to see how long it's going to be, and once you've got the length you want it to be, just pinch it right there and hold the feather against the hook shank like this, and then do a loose wrap of thread to hold it in place and tighten it down. And then just keep wrapping that feather. Once you get about 5 wraps, you can let go and it should stay in place. You do want to apply more pressure with your thread than you did at the beginning, but not enough to snap the thread. You just wind that feather up to the head of the jig. And the easiest way to clip the feather is to twist it up a little bit. This will make it so that it doesn't have any stray fibers going all over the place. You want to clear those feather fibers from the eye and then just cut that off. Cut it as close as you can, and if you have any stray fibers still, you can cut those off. Then I like to go over the fluffy end with the thread to clean it up and bring the thread back down to where we tied in the tail. For the body, I'm going to be using this pink tinsel chenille. Just grab about a 5 or 6 inch section of that. You want to make sure you have enough until you get the feel for how much you'll need in the future. You just don't want to run out when you're brand new at this, so take about 6 inches of that. And I like to tie it in right at the tail, and you want the tag end to go about up to the head of the jig. You can also tie it in from the head so that you get the right length, and then tie the chenille down to where you tied in the tail. Either way, whatever you prefer. Make sure that looks good. And then you can start wrapping the chenille. I like to pull the marabou fibers out to make sure they're not going to be trapped under the chenille. And then you can just start wrapping. When wrapping the chenille, you want to keep it perpendicular to the hook shank. And don't apply too much pressure, but apply enough so that it will have nice tight wraps. It can be a little difficult to get the hang of this at first, but with practice you'll get the hang of it in no time. Just make sure each wrap is pressed up against the last, so that you get a nice tight body. Wrap that up to the head, and once you're there, you can bring your thread up around the back of that chenille to tie it down. Do that about 2 or 3 more times to make sure it's tied down real tight. And then I like to do a wrap in front of the chenille, and once you're sure that it's secured, you can cut off the chenille. And then I'm going to do a couple more wraps just to make sure everything is tied down and it looks how I want it. And now we're going to grab our whip finish tool and just whip finish like in the previous video. When tying jigs, I like to do a 5-turn whip finish at least. Then pull your thread tight when you're done and clip it off. And that's it, you have tied your first jig. If you're afraid of it falling apart, or you want to keep it together so that you can have it memorialized, I would add a dab of super glue on the thread just to make sure it doesn't fall apart. Other than that, it should stay together. Now I'll get it wet to show you what it looks like. Well, congratulations on tying your first jig. Hopefully you don't get too addicted to it and waste all your money. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and I hope you catch lots of fish. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like and consider subscribing.